Hi folks, welcome back to the channel. So in this video I'm going to be showing you how I do my snow bases. What I've done here is I've used some cork tile and I've tore it up so that the edges of it are quite jagged and it makes it look more like rock. These I bought from Wix, which is a DIY store in the UK. I think they're in a pack of 9 and they're essentially used for corked flooring. I've then put PVA glue onto where there's any exposed base and I've put sand over the top of that. It doesn't matter too much if you get sand onto the rocks, as it just helps to make it feel that little bit more jagged. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to paint the rocks with Mechanicus standard grey. So we're going to just go in and paint all of the cork base. Just remember to get down the sides as well, don't miss any of those out. It's sometimes worth thinning it out a little bit as well, as it helps it flow around on the cork tile and get down into any grooves and crevices. So just paint the entire of the cork base this grey colour, and once you've done that, let it dry and we'll come back and do the next bit. So once you've finished painting the rocks and that's dried, we're then going to paint the sanded area with Gorthor Brown. This is just to make it look a little bit kind of muddy or a little bit of ground cover. It's worth thinning this down a little bit more so that it gets real down into the sand. You don't want it to kind of just thicken and layer up on the top of it. Don't worry about too much if you miss a few bits, because we will be putting snow down and that will cover it over anyway. So just pop around and anywhere you can see any exposed sand, just paint that. Once you're done, let it dry and then we'll move on to the next stage. Once the Gorthor Brown is completely dry, we're now going to take Ulthuan Grey and we're going to dry brush around the edge of the rocks, just to really highlight them, give it a little bit more of a texture and a bit more of a 3D feel. Remember, when you're dry brushing, I'm just rubbing it here on my knuckle, you can see there's hardly anything coming off there. Never be too frightened to wipe off more than you think. It's a lot easier to put more paint on and try again than it is to try and take it off again if you put it on too thick. We are going to wash this afterwards, so that's why I've gone with a much lighter grey, so don't worry about it at this stage. Just dry brush around the edges of the rocks to really kind of make them stand out. And then very lightly just brush around on the top as well. This will pick up some of the texture of the cork. Once you've done that, we'll come back and do the next stage. The next stage now is we're going to take Zandri Dust and we're going to dry brush onto that kind of brown muddy area. Very lightly just dust across the top. This just gives a little bit of texture. You might not need to do this. As you can see on this model, there's not a lot of it showing, and the majority of that is going to be covered with snow. But it depends upon how you've based your model. Just give that a few seconds to dry, as dry brushing dries very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next stage. So once your dry brushing is completely dry, make sure it is dry because we're going to wash it now. And if you try and put a wash on top of paint that's not quite dry, it ends up getting a bit just like dirty water. Next up, we're going to take an Agrax Earthshade and we're going to wash it over the entire base, all of the cork and all of the muddy brown area. What this does is it just dirties everything down a little bit, it blends in where you've dry brushed and it gives a much more earthy feel. It also makes the rocks look a little more natural. Just make sure you get into the side bits as well, just to make sure that we get into all those crevices. And once that's completely dry, we'll come back and do the next stage. Once that wash is completely dry, we're going to come around and paint the rim of the base. I'm going to be using Abaddon Black here, but you can use any colour that matches your army. I've used Gorthor Brown before and that can look quite nice, but these for my Infinity army, I like to get a nice clean black base, so I'm using Abaddon Black. So just thin down your paint a little bit, and then I tend to find it easier sometimes to use the side of my brush, as it tends to stop you going up onto the top. The next stage will be we're putting snow on, so we don't want to be trying to go back and touch it up with black paint at this point, not when we have the white snow on. So just go around, make sure it's completely dry, and we'll come back and do the snow. Once the rim of the base is completely dry, we're going to do the last stage now, which is to apply the snow. For this, we're going to be using the Valhallan Blizzard, which is one of the Citadel texture paints. Make sure you give the pot a good shake, and how I like to apply it, I use a coffee stirrer, which you can get from any local coffee shop, and just take your clippers and just give a flat end to it. Then just take your pot and scoop a little bit out. Then just think about which way the snow would have been blowing and how it would have built up on one side of the rock as it was coming in from one direction. If you put it everywhere, it can look a little unnatural. So just try and put it in one direction and don't worry about being too neat at the moment, because we are going to try and thin it out a little bit with a brush. Just make sure you put it on and pile it up. The snow does seem to settle a little as it's drying as well, so don't worry about how thick it is at this stage. It's also really good just to kind of dab it around the edge of the rocks, as this really does seem to stand out and looks like we've just got little patches of snow. It almost gives an effect of either snow just sort of starting up or snow just starting to melt. It's also worth putting some on top of the rocks as well, just to break up the base. I'm also just going to put a little on the back, so it's as if it's been coming in from the left hand side of the model, and we're just trying to just trying to highlight which way it would have been blowing in. Next, just take an old craft brush, just wet it down, and then just try and smooth it out a little bit to take out some of those lumps where you've piled it on. By doing this, it seems to move it around and thin it out, and it just makes it look a little more natural once it's dry. If you get any on the edge, just give it a little wipe with your thumb. You'll also get some onto your brush, so you can use that to move it around and pile it up onto the edges of the rocks too. Once you're done, just leave that to dry. We're going to leave it probably for a couple of hours just to harden up, and it really starts to thin out a little bit. It's definitely worth letting it dry out for a couple of hours because it really does look a little different once it's completely dry. Let's take a shot of the finished articles and I'll show you exactly how it looks with the 3 models together. These are part of Infinity the Game Operation Cold Front starter box, and no doubt you'll see these in some battle reports. Let me know down in the comments what you think. Have you got a different recipe for doing snow bases? This is just one way to do them. I have tried it in the past with different kind of snow powders, but I find the Citadel Valhallan Blizzard is just a really simple and really quick way of doing it, and it gives a fantastic finish. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.